Hi,
Hey,
noticers. It's just Urvi today with a wonderful and amazing and brilliant guest, Sophia Fifner. Maggie could not join, and she is missing us and missing you, Sophia. So I'm excited to be in conversation with you today. So welcome.
thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm so sorry that, we don't have a full squad, but I'm excited to be here today.
Yes, I think we will. We have so much to dive into. We know each other and have been able to build, a friendship through our work here in Columbus as well. And so I just appreciate that we can dive in on this platform and help our listeners understand and learn more about you. So to start off, Sophia is the president and CEO of the Columbus Metropolitan Club. And it's a visionary organization that connects people and ideas through community conversations. Really powerful and impactful in way shaping. I know because I've experienced it, the way it's, people can see what's going on in their community, they can relate and they can invest and they can become a part of it. So it's a crucial organization. Sophia launched her philanthropy and public policy career working first as a staff assistant under Senator George Voinovich in Washington, D.C., and most recently as a director of corporate and social responsibility and the executive director of the NiSource Charitable Foundation at NiSource. Over the time, Sophia has helped to secure and steward over $100 million in funds to support social impact. And she's served as a strategic senior advisor for S&P 500 CEOs and executives on messaging, channels, and delivery style with publications such as MSNBC, Bloomberg, Forbes, Fast Company, and the Wall Street Journal. She's an active and passionate volunteer and philanthropist who's supporting survivors of sexual violence and gender equity. She's currently giving her time to the Women's Fund of Central Ohio, Ohio Crime Victims Justice Center, Marcy's Law for Ohio, Freedom a la carte, and the Ohio, Alliance to End Sexual Violence. Is there anything I've missed, Sophia, that you want to make sure is highlighted?
No, I mean, I feel, speaking of transformation, I don't think that I'll ever feel comfortable hearing some of the work that I've done. Like, who is that person? Not me,
Yeah.
somebody else. But no, thank you so much for the opportunity to share a little bit about myself and have a really good conversation.
Yes, I have the same issue. And I don't, I sometimes sit with like, is that a gender thing? Is that even, the intersectional aspect of like being women of color, so I wonder where that comes from. And I really try to tamp it down as well. So I appreciate you just saying that, because it is true to hear back your accomplishments in like a truncated form. And I was like, oh my God, and she's done so much, even in that. So um I hear you. And
Yeah,
we're in it together and we'll celebrate one another.
yeah, absolutely.
So I want to kick off the conversation kind of where we do here, which is to say, there's so much to dive into about the amazing work that you do and the amazing way you show up as a human in this world. I know that you are not only, in the workforce, but you're also a mother, you're also, a volunteer, you're also a philanthropist, a daughter, a wife. And so there's so many things to you that impact the way that you're living currently. But I do want to talk about there's really interesting ways that you come through and have found, your stride in leadership, philanthropy, advocacy, the notions of, curiosity and compassion as they weave through the things that you are doing. But first, I want, to understand, and I want our listeners to have go on that journey with you to understand what has shaped you to show up in the world the way you are today, the origin sort of those values or the impactful events or struggles or life phases that have guided you and influenced you to, commit to certain causes or to look at the world in a certain way.
Oh, geez. Oh, how much time do we have?
We have plenty.
Probably not 5,000 hours, which would be a really boring story. So I will try to truncate the three things that have most impacted me and my transformation. The first thing would be that I'm the daughter of immigrants. And it's interesting because I've thought about this a lot as a first generation American, how much that lens and identity shapes how I navigate the world, especially as a Black woman, because you wouldn't be able to look at me and know, oh my God, my parents are from another country. But
Right.
that experience growing up in rural Ohio, where I didn't have some of the shared experiences of American kids, definitely shaped my lens on the world and how to create spaces of inclusion, but also how to navigate being an outsider of an outsider of an outsider. The customs of my Caribbean parents aren't the same customs of families who've lived here in the United States for a very, very long time. So very quickly, I had to learn how to be diplomatic, how to lean into spaces while really trying to find my own voice and do that in a way that brings people together. The second thing that really transformed how uh, I found my authentic voice is, unfortunately, and this might be incredibly challenging for some of your listeners to hear,
Thank you.
but I was a victim of sexual assault when I was a teenager. I was raped, and for the first time, I wish I could tell you that my story was one where people believed me, that my voice was heard, and that I immediately found justice. But it was a incredibly traumatic experience, which essentially enabled me to lose my voice for nearly 15 years. I didn't talk about what happened
Mm.
to me. Um, and it's been a journey where I've really had to try to understand legal systems. I've had to understand how I'm showing up in the world and being comfortable showing up as a Black woman. And it helped me learn how to advocate for myself. Um, and then the third thing would be being a mother. I always would hear from women, and I would not describe my aura as a maternal person in a very gendered sense. And by
Right.
maternal, I am not the mom who is baking like specialty cookies for my daughter's first grade class. That's never going to happen. I will write a
Mhm.
check. Aside from
Yeah.
that, aside from that, I, as my oldest daughter was born in 2016 in November, and if you have any listeners who are very attuned to current events, that was a pretty transformational year for me. It was a year when I really had to think about my political identity, my identity as a survivor of sexual assault, my identity as a first generation American, as a Black woman,
Mhm.
and as I brought this beautiful baby into the world, I wanted to make sure that I was no longer just advocating for issues that were important but not core to my sense of self. That I really started to show up for survivors of sexual assault, for Black women, and that's a promise I made to her a few days after she was born, and it's a promise I think about on a regular basis.
Oh, that is just, you've captured it so beautifully. Like, through, you can tell, you've reflected on what has shaped you. And it's like important. I think, I know that you really appreciate, self curiosity and that space. And I know that that was probably just the journey to even be able to say, these are the three things that really impacted me and that have shaped me. But not only that, like that I've had to work through, that I've had to shift with as they shifted, is also like work in and of itself, right? And so I really admire that, and have similarly kind of been in that space and journey. And one thing, you're even mentioning about like motherhood, I deeply resonate with what you're saying. Is like, I say I'm not really maternal, but I'm like an awesome mom, because I love being a mom to my children, but it wasn't like I walk around with that, you just see the beautiful humans that are very maternal. And I'm like, that's awesome. And even in that, kind of checking our society and the gendered norms around that, where it was like, there's kind of one or two ways to be a good mom, quote unquote, and whereas like, no, there's a million ways to be a parent, or there was, and in this specific instance, because I know we both identify as mothers, it's like, to be a mother. And it's nice to be, in company and share those stories. I do it here, I do it kind of everywhere, where it's like, there is no mold for it, and the way that you do it more authentically, right, is like so supportive to. I know you have two girls, and I have two, kids presenting as boys, I like to say, and it's like just to see them own who we are and the way that we want to do it is like so important for them in the modeling. So I really appreciate that and admire that in you, that you can
Yeah.
even share that here.
Yeah, transformation. I feel like these different phases of my life, I'm in a constant search for getting closer to what my definition of alignment and uh, just showing up in a way that I feel best reflects my values and my intentions every single day. And they've shifted and changed and morphed over time. So
Mm.
I'm excited about where I am and the steps that I've taken to get to this place, but I can't wait to truly, see who I am, hopefully in the next 30 or 40 years. Like, what will that look like?
Yes, yes. Here, here. And one of the things I want to like I have so many things I want to talk to you about. So like, which may just be we'll do like a repeat season with like all of our guests a second time around because this is like a recurring theme, which I'm here for. I am actually really curious, and I haven't been able to necessarily have this conversation here yet, aside from just sharing a little bit from my perspective. So I'm just so grateful you're here because I would love to talk about it. And you brought it, up with your reflections in about 2016 and how you saw these like really distinct aspects of your identity come to the fore. I would love to talk about, how or see into like how did that so you identify, right? Like you're like, I have a political identity, I have this survivor identity, I have a Black woman identity, I have an immigrant identity, and obviously we talk about intersectionality, which I just haven't been able to, talk really clearly about here. And if you will, like I would love to talk about how those identities intersected for you then and shifted for you. So even going kind of like laser deeper into that, you saw that those things were being affected. If you can just share about that effect or kind of what was occurring. And then also just how you see those playing for you now and really that component of just it's so clear. You're so clear about the intersectional nature of your identity and the
Yeah,
forces that pull you in and out of those.
yeah. I think that one of the things that I found is really unique for me in how I see myself and how the world sees me, or how my interpretation of how the world
Yeah.
sees me, is that I oftentimes feel like the world wants to place me in a dichotomous box or a hierarchy of identities. That I am more of a Black woman than a spiritual human being. That I am more of an immigrant than or just a individual who identifies as female. And
Yeah.
even in the advocacy spaces, I sometimes feel like, and especially political advocacy, you're one thing or you're the other. And I recently read a book by Polly Murray, Song in a Weary Throat. And what I found really beautiful about Polly Murray's experience, and for your listeners who aren't familiar with who she was I believe, I hope I'm getting the title correctly, a reverend or a spiritual leader. She was an activist, a lawyer. I think today some might have identified her as transgender, who I believe was queer, and she was born in 1910. But her
Wow.
advocacy work was the groundwork for many influential U.S. Supreme Court decisions, including Thurgood Marshall's Brown versus Board of Education decision. Like, she was brilliant. But what I found most inspiring about her is how she saw herself as this mosaic of identities, and all of those pieces of the mosaic were equally important. And she struggled with being in spaces where she was forced to make a choice about her, and she would describe it as being a person of color versus a woman. And I see
Mhm.
that same struggle with me because I feel like all of these pieces of me are equally important. So when it comes to 2016, as someone who started their professional career on Capitol Hill, working for a Republican who's very familiar with politics and policy, to have these national conversations brought up about so many facets of the mosaic of my identity, be it being, the daughter of immigrants and the immigrant experience, to being female, to being a survivor, it
Mm-hmm.
really gave me pause to start thinking about these titles are so important to me, but how am I truly, if they're emotionally impacting me? I feel like this is not okay. But how am I communicating that to my friends who perhaps are, of different political backgrounds and don't quite understand this mosaic that I've built,
Yeah.
but I am? Like, how am I showing up in the world for those issues in a more intentional way? So that really sparked a lot of questions for myself and led me on this journey to be more intentional about my philanthropy and how I'm navigating showing up in my own community.
Yes. Yes. And I think what comes in, well, one thing that has come in through the reflection that I have, and I wonder if it does for you too, is like, I notice what identities or what parts of my identity, I bring forward and kind of expand and contract in every scenario that I'm in. One, which we can talk a little bit about, because I think it's just helpful, is the concept of code switching. Like I want to talk about that a little bit, and I want to put it maybe on the side for a second. Is also just talking about like the conflict. I know I've felt this conflict a little in terms of this identification, like, and then understanding which ones I want to bring forward and carry forward that are part and parcel to my values, right? And one is what in the space of intersectionality, they kind of call, there's like a wheel of like power and privilege.
Mm-hmm.
So this notion that, at any given time, like for example, your political identity could hold power while your identity, your racial identity is disempowering, right? Or it has like one has privilege while the other has oppression. And that is also like there's a code switching, I think, that occurs in that too, when you're constantly assessing yourself, as a person who, is no longer impacted in the same way as the system would once have if you weren't aware. Now, you take hold of that differently. And I'm speaking that, I should say, I take hold of that differently. I observe you two too, but please, say no, that's not true. And so I think we're moving through the world differently now, and we're not so possibly affected by the system as we might once have been. But then obviously there's just something that is so deeply systemic that we can't control it. It's like we get swept up into the wave of that as well. But I noticed that aspect to me too, right? Like, so there's the code switching component of just the identity, like just the relationship of my identities. But then there's a code switching aspect of the power, privilege, and disadvantage tension. You know what I mean? Where I'm like, oh, is that happening to me? How can I leverage my privilege? But then also at the same time, I'm like, I'm kind of in the disadvantaged place here. You know what I mean? So I'm curious your thoughts about that.
Yeah. Ooh, that's it's so layered. I would say that the thing that comes to mind to me the most is my parents really wanted to assimilate into American culture as much as possible. So growing up, I had a very limited view of the world, and the expectations for me was to assimilate as much as I possibly can. So my hairstyle, and this is a podcast, so people can't see that I have locks, but my hairstyles were, I straightened, as a black woman, I straightened my hair. I was corrected if I was participating in activities that my parents perceived as limiting the full potential of economic success. And that, in their minds, meant really modeling at modeling lifestyles and behaviors and social activities that would put me in a position where I could navigate a room of white men who have grown up in country clubs and who, have influential careers. And I share that to say, when it comes to code switching, I think that the biggest thing that I've noticed is not necessarily code switching connected to my racial identity or my immigrant experience, but honestly, my economic code switching, speaking the language of individuals who have wealth. You read in my interest statement like how much I've raised or stewarded over the years, and I it's funny because my favorite type of philanthropy is philanthropy where people are rounding up change, like pocket change, to give to organizations. My least favorite is asking individuals who have high capacity to give just to write a check for $1 million or several $1,000,000. It's not my favorite form of philanthropy, but I'm digressing too much. But to bring it back, I feel that I have this. I see this frequently because I sit in so many different rooms. And as a Black woman with locks, I code switch a lot into a language that I feel helps me open doors into spaces that perhaps individuals who look like me, who don't have the same language skills or language experiences, would be able to do that successfully. And to bring that back even further, for my advocacy for survivors of sexual assault, I was not believed. I reported what happened to me, and I was told that I lied. That what happened to me was not rape. It indeed was. I didn't know that back then. And my parents, as immigrants, they weren't going to question the police. If the police are telling them that, nope, this isn't rape, why would they question that? My parents didn't have means to hire lawyers who didn't know what their rights were. But after working on Capitol Hill and understanding how legislation is made, after understanding how to be an effective communicator in spaces that perhaps my parents didn't have access to, I know how critical it is for me to continue to leverage my voice, not just for myself, but for other survivors who perhaps can't walk up to an elected official and say, here's why this policy needs to change. Or walk up to a donor and say, we really need to fund this cause because there are women who are greatly impacted by, the support of this nonprofit or the impact of this legislation or these policies, and they perhaps speak a different language, and it becomes really challenging. So I really try. I think that that's something that I think about a lot, and it's why I continue to use my voice as much as possible. If I can help with communication, to empower more people to do good and to build more spaces of understanding, it's really important to me.
Yes. And no, there's nothing a lot here. We go on, there's no tangent and there's no such thing as a tangent. There's just very exciting and deep conversation, which I appreciate that we are sitting here able to have. And when you were sharing about, your hair and just how that shifted for you. And I was thinking, and showing up in different rooms. And I was thinking, I was it's also something to take on the perception of what you will be when you walk into a room before you have even spoken, right? And the perception. I mean, you obviously you're just so experienced in all of the ways that you have shared, right? Both from a communications perspective, but even your ability to kind of navigate life and having navigated that long stretch of time where, you kind of lost your voice. That in and itself was an experience that I think breathes through you and shines through you now because it's important to how you're showing up. So of course there's that aspect of just how am I going to be perceived, in these situations, and probably the shift you have to do pretty quickly when you start speaking, how people then change their reaction, to you.
Oh yeah. It's funny. In my 20s, I spent a lot of time competing in pageants. And there's a great documentary on TLC about the secrets of Miss America. The first series is Secrets of Playboy Bunnies, which I think tells you a lot about the Miss America scholarship program. I have mixed feelings about it. I think that it was a wonderful experience that truly helped me find my voice in advocacy and being an
Mm-hmm.
activist, but also uh, like to be explicit whipped into me a level of assimilation that is incredibly damaging.
Wow.
But it taught me how to walk into spaces and not be a threat as a Black woman. I wore straightened hair for a very long time. I was very thoughtful about my style of dress and my down to what nail polish I wore on my nails, because they were all these assumed social norms that I must, and rules of how people should navigate and show up in the world, that I followed. And quite frankly, I received a lot of positive responses from it. I think that it's one of the, if I would have walked into certain spaces with luck, I don't know if I would have had the same opportunities that
Yeah.
I had. I mean, I wish I could say hindsight's 2020. I do feel like people approach me differently based off of external ex, ex, presentations. Um, again, for your listeners, I have a darker complexion. I have like rainbow nails typically, and I wear locks. There's a an appearance here that people will see and will respond very differently to. Like so much so, like in my current role as the CEO of the Columbus Metropolitan Club, it's always funny because I just became the CEO about a year ago, and we have a space of wonderful people who are passionate about Central Ohio, who are often change makers in their own right. But I don't think that people think they see me and go, "Oh, she's the CEO." Because sometimes I'm wearing jeans and I have rainbow nails. I'm a little shorter. Actually, I'm very short. I'm just going to accept it. I'm 5'3". Like, I don't have a big presence. But it's
Right.
always funny when I'm navigating this space of 200 people, and especially people who don't know me, who don't know who the CEO is. And then I'll
Yeah.
start talking to them about, whatever, just making chit chat. Because the CMC, the Columbus Metropolitan Club, is a space for networking. And then they'll go, "Oh, so like, how are you? Like, what do you do at the Columbus Metropolitan Club?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm the CEO." And they're like, "Oh."
Yes.
Part of me is kind of tickled by their assumption that I wouldn't be the CEO. But then also, I'm like, geez, it's also partially awkward. I hate when I have to be like, "I'm the CEO." But I'm also like, geez, I'm really glad that I'm changing perceptions on what leadership looks like, because they're
Yes.
saying, "Oh," because they're not thinking that I'm the CEO. This, woman with locks, rainbow nails, and, a presence that's a little bit shorter in stature.
I love everything you're talking about because I feel like there has been one. I think that I saw a little bit of your transformation. I didn't know that because I don't think we talked about it, but I think, so you could, a bit like 2016, I think that was, we had kids the same time, our oldest. And I feel like, we were engaged in some work here in the community in similarly. And then that's how we met. And then I think I saw your shifting and I was shifting at the same time. And I will say I was shifting towards, um, like one day I love wearing black. I love wearing, black and white. But then I started to say to myself, like, what is it? Where's the origin of this for you? Like, it's not that it's wrong. I just wanted to kind of have a little bit more of like, was it because I was trying to hide and become like be more acceptable in a group of people? I really had to look at that for myself. And some people don't ever have to have that conversation with themselves. But for me, I started to think like, why is wearing a bold pink suit as you have done, or like whatever it be, or I mean, and me, green, I love green, so I'll wear like a green one. And it's like, why is that audacious, or like, why is that garish? And I started to come up to myself and thinking like, when I go to pick out a particular outfit for a certain event, like to your point, it's like I'm thinking about my nails, like, right. And I started to get frustrated at myself where I was like, first of all, you've got a newborn, you've got like young kid, like you don't have time to worry about all of the nitpick yourself about all these things based on how you might be perceived, right? Like that was one of those like inquiry moments for me. And I'm like, okay, so if like you weren't worried about that, would you just dress for your day and your mood, right? Like you would just go into your closet and be like, today I feel like being comfortable, like reasonably comfortable. I'm not showing up in my pajamas anywhere. And maybe some people, I wouldn't care if somebody did, but like if I don't want to do that, but if, okay, or so then I'm going to wear like this thing because this is what is going to be a mood lifter or whatever. Then I started kind of thinking about that even more critically and where the origin of that was. And really like it's a colonial origin. And I didn't, so like chromophobia is something that comes from, especially in like imperial times in India, like it's a chromophobic thing where it was like the idea, and it was a power thing. So what was happening was that, India is full of brilliant colors, as are many cultures outside of the American one in terms of fabric, in terms of, like ethnic wear. And it was interesting because I was like, okay, so the first thing that people always comment, so I had an Indian wedding. It was colorful. And anytime people see those pictures, like even people I meet now in my life, that was over a decade ago, they'll say, oh my God, it's so colorful. I love Indian weddings because they're so colorful. And it's always the first, like, part of their joy, like their connection is like that it's colorful and the vibrancy of something, right? And I was like, that started to sit with me too. I'm like, oh, okay, like why is everybody always noticing the color? And then I thought, oh, especially even in this day and age, and I giggle because I feel like there's this whole movement towards neutrality. Like there's this whole movement towards like beige and blush and like the like conformity that's even forming. Like we go into our homes and like we go in and everything is like neutral, and I'm like, what are we saying by that? Like, right? Like you can have an appreciation for neutrality. Like I'm relatively, like I love my reactions to be coming from a neutral perspective, but it's like, what does it say that, our Instagram pages or that like all of, our design culture, like everything is like conforming us to this like colors of sand, and I want to say sand, and like, and neutral. And I was like, and I was having my reckoning with like wanting to bust out of neutrality and not being seen and stepping into being okay being seen. Like, okay being like, sure, if I wear a like neon green suit, people are going to notice. Like there is going to be comments.
Yes.
It makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that dress, three things come to mind. I think the dress and colors, you might have a listener go, oh, that's so soft, especially if they're, super deep on their, journey towards diversity, equity, inclusion. But I feel like the further you get into it, you realize how critical it is to give people space to show up as themselves, and how so many cultures cannot. My husband is a white individual, a white male, and if he walked around in, a hoodie in a dark parking lot, people aren't going to question him. But if my father, who is a tall black male, walking around in a dark parking lot with a hoodie, people are going to approach him a little differently versus if he was wearing a suit. Like wardrobe and style and dress and hair, all of these things greatly impact how people are perceived in the world. There was this moment when I was working for a corporation, and I remember we had an investor day presentation on Wall Street. And I remember walking, I had a lot of anxiety because I was starting to realize that this was not the space for me. It was a wonderful company. I had a lot of opportunity. The leadership was great. I felt disconnected from my community. And for me, that's an important value that I really, really needed in my life. So at the time I was deciding, like, should I paint my nails rainbow or like is that too bold? Like I'd never painted my nails rainbow before. I was so depressed about going on this trip that I was like, I'm painting my nails rainbow because it just makes me happy. Like I just like seeing something bright and colorful, especially in a space like Wall Street where you see a lot of black and monochromatic colors of dressing. But I remember we did a bell ringing ceremony, and I'm clapping, and the CEO's right here or right in front of me, and there are executive leaders for this corporation around me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I kind of want to jump off of this balcony. Like these are not my people. This is not my space. Nothing wrong with Wall Street. I really thrive in spaces of community. And that was a really big pivot moment for me because I was like, I don't feel like my outside match my insides. I don't believe that my work aligns with how I want to
Mm,
show up in the world. And it was that moment where I was like, I'm done. I'm done questioning whether or not I'm allowed to paint my nails whatever color I want. I am done with going through my wardrobe and going, ooh, geez, well, if I pick this color, hot pink, I might not be taken as seriously.
right.
If I change my hair to locks, people might have assumptions about who I am. I'm done with it. I'm just done. I'm tired. I'm not doing that anymore. And that kind of started this journey of really making sure that my outside looked like my inside and not
Yeah.
questioning it anymore. And at the CMC, our whole goal is to connect people and ideas through community conversation. But we are an organization that's been around for 50 years. We established a culture in that 50 years where people had to wear suits and business attire to show up. You mentioned wearing your pajamas outside. I don't care if somebody wears their pajamas or an evening gown to the CMC. I want them to come as is, as their best selves in whatever format that is, as long as they're there to hear from diverse perspectives and amplify our mission.
Yes, absolutely. And I think now, like, this is like transit a little bit, but it's like about, I think this is like also the gender piece of it comes in really deeply here to me, where it's like, one, there's such a mental load, right? Like, I mean, we're talking about, there's this aspect. I mean, I feel like code switching kind of comes back into it as well, but it's like when you're standing there, like, it's extremely taxing to think all the time about all of those things and how much capacity. Like, that was the other reflection I had when I stopped caring because it was right and it gave me more confidence. So this is not like prescriptive. Like, not everybody has to do it the way you and I have, decided or determined to do it. And listen, I still love most often, like, this podcast, you can find it on YouTube and you probably will see me wearing a black shirt or clothing. I'm okay with that. But I have a colorful background. But even then, like, that might have not been the case had I not gone through that journey. I think a lot about just even the role, like how much women think about how they'll be perceived, going into a space or a place because of, their dress, and even like everything from, and how much we don't honor our bodies in that way, right? Because it's like there's certain times where we're like, well, I want to wear that, but like, oh, that might be revealing, or that skirt too short, or is that, and that component of it all of the time,
Mm-hmm.
is just like, it's so taxing. It's one of those things that when we talk about like deep self-care and you're like, how can you remove some of those? Like, to be able to find authenticity or alignment, or go down the journey towards your alignment, like, those are the sort of micro moves that you get rid of that help you in that journey to like alignment, right? Like, it doesn't seem significant because, of course, just saying like, I'm going to embrace the day and wear whatever colors I want doesn't seem like, oh my God, so significant. But that reframe and the ability to then to act from that perspective, what it offers is like, it frees up space, like in this
Mm-hmm.
like computer up in our, between our ears. Like, it's like, and that's incredibly important, especially with like, I know the women like that you interact with and see, and the people that I interact with, and especially in the coaching space. And, I'm like, we need to free up time. We need to free up space. We need to, and that's just one opportunity. So thank you for like even going down that route here, because I think it illuminates like, one, there's just a lot of power in reclaiming that for yourself, or just deciding where it is that you want to move from,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know?
I feel like, again, it seems like, these insignificant being able to wear your hair or feel comfortable in your body or to pick out clothes that you feel best reflect who you are. But you can, going back to current events, I think it's everything for so many people to be able to just show up as themselves, whomever they are. And I'm excited that I've gotten this far in my journey. And again, I just can't wait to find out where I'll be in the future. I hope I'm wearing like colorful feathers. That's where I'm wearing colorful feathers and like dancing in the woods.
Yeah. Oh my. Well, I will join you because I like in my own growth journey, I was like, I feel like I need to be like a caftan wearing rollerblader. I mean, no, not rollerblader, actually a roller skater.
Ooh. Hmm.
And I was like, that feels like, and choreographed. So like,
Yeah,
it's
I
like,
will join
so,
you.
okay, I love it because, then I thought to myself, what an image of like me like rolling down the street in a caftan, like a colorful flowing caftan, like
Yeah,
busting some moves. I can imagine particularly my neighborhood would just be like, what
yeah.
is going on?
But I love that, and I'm here for it. So whenever you need a squad of people to join you, like I would be here for it.
I have you been to, like Venice Beach in LA and they like on Sunday mornings there's this whole thing and I got to like see it really deeply one time and I love it. I love people watching so it's even more important. I was like, this is what I need to do. So if we can recreate that here in Columbus,
Yeah,
let's do it.
I'm here for it, 100%.
So we're not waiting 20 years. We're going to do it now.
Sounds good.
And I just need to, I was a great roller blader. I'm not a great roller skater. So me learning dance moves on it is going to take me a little bit of time.
Oh, it will be a complete catastrophe for me, but good entertainment, so it's fine.
And maybe we'll have to do a little video recording of that and put it on the YouTube channel for like after show.
I love that. I'm here for it.
So I know that we have been chatting a lot and we've taken it in, a direction which I really appreciate. I think is a great food for thought. But I also want to talk about, before we close, just talk a little bit about how you are approaching leadership and philanthropy and connection making, because I know you have like a really critical lens that you've taken now in doing in those specific areas, and I would be remiss to leave that out here. So if you want to kind of speak to how you're approaching those, I would love to
Yeah,
have that here.
yeah. I think that I don't know one person, regardless of their political ideology or their economic class or their race or gender, who does not care about their community. It's rare. It's so rare. People care about what the experience is for their kids who are going to an elementary school. They care about the state of their neighborhood. They care about public parks. And because I've had so many experiences working in philanthropy or government
Mm-hmm.
relations or community relations, I've seen how much ordinary individuals care. But what I've also noticed is that people don't know how to get plugged in into their community. Columbus has nearly 14,000 nonprofit organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to understand how to attend a public meeting for the city of Columbus can be really intimidating to somebody who doesn't know where to find that information. And I think sometimes people go, oh, like, am I allowed to participate? Yes, it is your government. You are allowed to participate in public meetings. But finding
Yes.
that information in a meaningful way outside of a Instagram post or a 3-minute story on local news or reading a short article at the Dispatch is really challenging, which is one of the reasons why I love leading the Columbus Metropolitan Club, because our whole purpose is to help people with civic discourse, understanding
Mm-hmm.
what's happening in the community in a really intentional way and being able to ask questions. I mean,
Yeah.
last week we had the mayor, we had several city council members, we had thought leaders in transportation come and share their perspective on an initiative called Link Us. And you could walk right up to any of them and ask them any questions you have, which is awesome, right? But in a space that where you're walking in knowing that you're just looking to learn and to create a space of understanding. And then
Yeah.
simultaneously, my hope is that our next chapter for the CMC is a place where we can help connect people to take action. Because that's the hugest, that's not even a word. Hugest is not a word. That's the biggest barrier that I see with individuals who care. They don't know where to start. So I'm hoping that our next step can be really helping people expand their vocabulary around civic engagement. Oftentimes,
Yes.
when speaking to women, they go, "Oh, I'd love to be connected, but I don't have time." I'm like, "Well, you don't only have to give your time. Like, there's so many ways to give. You can give your time, any amount of time. There's no test on how much time. If you have 5 minutes, awesome. If you have 4 hours, awesome. You can give your treasure. So financially, you can support organizations. And again, especially for women, I always find myself in conversations after speaking about philanthropy where women go, but I don't really have a lot to give. Like that's again, my favorite form of philanthropy is rounding up and pocket change. If you have $1 to
Mm-hmm.
give, that's awesome. If you have $1,000 to give, that's awesome too. It all matters to organizations, and I'd much rather people give something than nothing. Or if you have your testimony, like if you can speak to issues that are really important,
Mm-hmm.
advocacy is so important in getting connected to elected officials. And then last, if you have skills, the talent and any
Yeah.
skill, whether it be communications, wellness, etc. There's so many organizations and ways to engage in your community where you can leverage those skills to make a difference. And my hope is that that's the next chapter for the CMC, really helping people connect in their community at any capacity, but be on a journey to community engagement and philanthropy versus approaching it as a one and done, must be large quantities or not at all. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
zero-sum game, and it's not a journey that's only for a flash moment. It's a journey that should be a lifelong journey, and
Mm.
an ebb and flow.
Yes, I love it. Like, I think your just deep commitment to philanthropy for yourself has really shown through in the way that you want to educate and support others in kind of creating that path to themselves. And I hear you saying, like if you can give $1 today, you can also build a plan for yourself to give $10 next year and $20 and whatever that looks like, and nothing is too much and nothing is too little.
Yeah.
And I appreciate, and I hope it's okay for me to mention, but like you even shared with me kind of like you and your husband, like you guys sit down and think about your financial plan for the year coming. And I was, inspired by that. I think we all do it in some way or shape or form, but like it included, your philanthropic giving and how that component is really important. And that was, just something that, again, like for people to think about, it's like it doesn't have to be transactional. So I do it one time. It can be transformational, and it can be transformational over time. It doesn't have to feel like it's just today and then that was it, or that this year is all I can do. And it's like, I appreciate that because I love to think into that too. And as I consider myself a philanthropist and how that's grown over time, when I reflect back, through the spirit of like volunteerism, time, talent and treasure, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I've grown it, and I look forward to seeing how it grows further. And also what could be my plan for that? In this conversation, I'm realizing like, what can be my plan for that? Right. Because that is interesting, a question for
Mm-hmm.
myself, so that's like an insight that I'm like pulling out of like what you're sharing too. And how all of these different ways of being philanthropist or advocate or active, like they all kind of hand in hand,
Yeah.
and they're under like one big umbrella of like what you shared, which is everybody's connected to their community. So it's like you're a community member, and then your civic engagement, your
Yeah.
philanthropy, your activism, like your advocate, like those all swirl together under that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't, I am really passionate about civic engagement and studying civic engagement and understanding the ebbs and flows of civic engagement over the decades here in the United States. And I feel
Mm,
like as a culture, it's the levels of civic engagement and discourse have certainly waned over the last 20 plus years in a dramatic way. And to
mhm,
me, I would love to start a revival here in Columbus of people who approach civic engagement as a journey, that it's not something that it's a one and done. It's a journey that you're going to invest in. And that investment, just like financial planning, just like your health, is something that you're going to commit to, you're going to fall down on, you're going to get back up on. You're going to commit to investing in this space
mm,
from now until you're celebrating your last birthday.
mm. And I have a question that is coming up for me through kind of what you're sharing, because I loved that you were kind of saying, in the forums and the community conversations I create through my work, people can come up and engage with, perceived authority figures. And I say perceived authority figures because I think, and I would be curious from your study of civic discourse, that power structure and the imbalance has really created, and I'll be more specific about that, right? Like, we look at politicians now, or the people we have elected, or the policymakers, as having power over versus having power with, us. And so I think, and I know that personally from my own vantage point, and even being like in the work, like I've done advocacy, big A and little a advocacy, on the Hill, like similar to you, in the state house. And I think about it, even mine perspective on it, where it's like the way I approach it is like through a fallacy, of this perceived power dynamic, and that this, like, they don't want to hear from me. And it's part of that is unjust. It's not that they don't want to hear from me. There are some that don't. There's, like, let's be honest about that. Like, they're not really authentic in their position, but they're not trying to be like that. And I think because of that shift, I think through the decades, it's caused that rift, that caused that disconnection. And I would be curious, through your study, what comes up for you as I share that?
I think that a lot of residents of Central Ohio have this, for multiple reasons, this perception that elected officials are, we elected them, but now the power is with them to take action. But truly, like somebody asked me recently, there was an individual I was speaking with who was running a congressional candidate, and they were asking me, like, well, where do I lean on politics? Am I a Republican or am I a Democrat? I'm like, honestly, I'm neither. But I feel, because is there a person that I aspire or like really appreciate their policy lens? I'm like, well, that's kind of hard, because I feel good elected officials are elected officials who are truly making decisions based off of the input from their residents and the people who voted for them. Mm-hmm. They're making decisions with their community. So I might not necessarily agree with everything, because it might be the best needs for that specific community. I think good elected officials are elected officials who take that approach, who might have a philosophical perspective on how to solve solutions, but really transformational leaders are leaders that acknowledge that it takes a village, that it takes multiple perspectives, that it takes the diverse and the best and brightest ideas to create solutions that truly work. And thankfully, I do think that in Central Ohio, we have many leaders who align with that perspective. I just wish that all residents here in Central Ohio knew how accessible they truly are.
Yes. And I think that honestly extends beyond Central Ohio. I think that is probably a thread of a theme that occurs for all, levels of government and levels of policy, political engagement and civic engagement, for somebody. I think it's true everywhere. Having lived in many places, I'm like, I see that so many places. So I really just love that we can kind of culminate to, especially like knowing your story, like this particular message, which is like, participate in the way that feels accessible to you, and then create a plan forward, and that's incredible. And I think it is, hopefully it's inspiring me to even think differently. And I hope that that's like, for our listeners, like that's something that you can reflect on as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, my somebody asked me, how do I feel that I'm the CEO of this organization focused on community? I'm like, I'm leading a community organization, and to me, the most important thing is that I'm doing everything I can to create a space where every person that I connect with feels empowered to make a difference in a positive way, and in whatever their definition of positive, right? It's whether they're incredibly progressive or liberal, or they have a lot of time or a little time. I just want people to know that bright communities thrive when you have active participation. There's lots of research that shows that. And I just want to create that.
Yeah. And I'm so grateful, and in support of you. And I know many are, in terms of your leadership, and just, to be able to put in and see different kind of leadership showing up, right, in our community. And really that being, I love the word disruptive, and then I hate the word disruptive because I don't like the negative aspect of it, right? But like,
Yeah.
I guess, um, but sometimes things need to be disrupted in order for
Yeah.
like the innovation, and the belonging and the sense of like trueness and authenticity of all of us to come out. And I feel like without pressure, you're becoming kind of in that space, like at least a nice beacon to see that coming through in our community. And while I'm sure it comes inherently with its challenges, some of which we've talked and some of which you've overcome here, like we've discussed, it's also interesting, just to like such a perfect, for lack of a better word, like a perfect place for this to be occurring within the community, because like you said, it's such an access point. So many people engage with it and with the work of CMC and the mission of it. That it's really cool to see you at the helm of that, and to be in this community. And of course, I want to support you in making sure that like that feels like somewhere you can stay and be.
Yeah. I mean, I talk about our mission because oftentimes the CMC, again, this community organization has focused on bringing people together in person in a room with 200 people. But my goals for the organization, while I have the capacity to serve our mission, is to do this in as many places as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that there should be no barriers for any individual, regardless of the community that you live in, to understanding what's happening in your community. And oftentimes, the people who are undecided or who are moderate or who don't have access to information are left out of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just not okay with that. I think that everywhere in the United States, and quite frankly, everywhere in the entire world, that we should have access to information. We should have access to things that are impacting our community, whether it be through healthcare, through art, through your sexual
Education,
identity or
yeah.
orientation. And, like, all of those things are incredibly important. And if I can equip just one person, or at least Central Ohio, with the tools to make a difference in a positive way, to give them a space to have a voice, that I feel like then I'm like, all right, we're on a good trajectory here. Look, I've done my job.
Yes. Well, thank you for doing that. I should say that as someone who gets to swirl through that space and this space here in this region. I think it's great, and beyond, I know it will be really impactful. I want to make sure there's so much to talk about, but I want to make sure this time feels, complete. Like if there's anything you want to share that we haven't touched on that's really meaningful to you, please, I would open up this space for you.
I feel like we talked about a lot. One thing that I want to just put a pin in is I've been really focusing, like, my word for the year is luminosity, because I feel that we all have a light within us. Just to kind of also put a bow on everything, we all have a light within us. And how do we let that brilliance shine as much as possible? How do we tear down the barriers that are preventing us from leaning into our full potential? Because if we all let our lights shine, the reflection on all these other individuals who are also shining their lights is just pure brilliance. So I'm really thankful that I'm at this place in my journey, but it's been with a lot of intention. I've been spending time actually taking retreats into the woods to better connect and reflect on my personal journey. And I think that's something that I'd just like to share with your listeners, that making space for reflection is I would say, it's everything in any journey of transformation. It's not something that's going to happen if you don't take a moment to pause.
Oh, what a positively perfect close. And bringing that to a close. I do want to ask you, what we ask every guest here, which is, what are you noticing today?
Oh, geez. If I'm being completely honest, I'm noticing that I feel an incredible amount of pressure. As much as I have taken steps to really lean into my authenticity as a Black female leader, I also feel a level of pressure to lead our organization in the right direction, to show up in my community as um, an individual with strong leadership values and a leadership presence that feels intense. That I don't really have a lot of opportunity or wiggle room to make mistakes as much as people
Mm.
would say that I have opportunities to make mistakes. So if I'm just being candid, I feel an incredible amount of pressure. The good news is I'm an optimist. I'm like, I feel really confident about the future of Central Ohio. I feel really confident about the mission that I'm on to embrace light and to help connect more people. So I think perhaps a little pressure is really good. Perhaps we're building a diamond here in Columbus.
Mm. That is, thank you for sharing that, like candidly, because that is important to acknowledge. How can people connect with you? Can they find you after this beautiful conversation?
So please feel free to visit my website, sophiafifner.com. Additionally, I'm on social media, specifically Instagram and LinkedIn and TikTok. So all at Sophia Fifner. So I look forward to connecting with folks. And if they're in the Central Ohio area or visiting Central Ohio, I welcome anyone to participate in our forums with the Columbus Metropolitan Club. They can find information about the Columbus Metropolitan Club at columbusmetroclub.org.
Thank you so much, Sophia, for meandering this conversation with me and bringing to light so many critical themes that we should all consider for ourselves and for those who are having different lived experiences around us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.